Hello. This week I'm in the middle of reading this book, The Lost Knowledge of the Imagination by Gary Lachman, for the third time. And it's amazing. It's an amazing book, and it's giving me lots of inspiration for things that I want to bring to the mystery school in the months to come. Specifically today I wanted to speak about Owen Barfield. Owen Barfield was part of the literary circle around people like C.S. Lewis, the great Christian writer, and J.R.R. Tolkien of Lord of the Rings fame. And that small group was really experimenting and thinking about very interesting ideas that had to do with language and with the creation of reality. Owen Barfield in particular, in his studies of language, and particularly earlier languages, came to the conclusion that earlier languages were more metaphorical than our more literary language today. You know, our words are more literal. They mean what they say. He said earlier languages were more metaphorical. They sort of spoke in stories that could be interpreted in a variety of ways, more like poetry. Now that actually is a little bit different than the way most people up until that time had thought about earlier languages. They did know that, of course, if you went back through history, language was more metaphorical, there were more mythical stories, that's the way people tended to speak. But there was a belief that prior to that, there would have been a period where the language was very literal. So in other words, it was just a grunt or a sound that meant a specific something, like wall, you know, would be wall, or whatever it would be that would signify. It would be very literal, very concrete. Owen Barfield was saying, well, that doesn't really make sense because the evidence we have seems to be that the further back we go, the more metaphorical the language gets. And that idea is mirrored in this book, which I've read a couple of times. It's called The Culture of Spontaneity, and it's by Daniel Belgrade. And in this book, I was introduced to the idea of participation mystique. This was developed by a French philosopher named Lucius Levi Bruhl, and it was made popular by Carl Jung. And the idea of participation mystique, which essentially means mystical participation, is that in earlier cultures, consciousness was not so separated from the world. It was more in a sort of participatory dance with the world. So again, there was a more metaphorical feeling to the way that consciousness worked. The world wasn't so distinctly out there and we were distinctly over here looking at it. It was more like we and it were one thing and there was some dance happening between us. So I think both of those ideas are fascinating, and they, to me, relate to this idea of betweenness that I have written about in Paradigm Shifting. This also sometimes this space known as the imaginal realm. It's an in-between space where you're not disappeared into oneness, but you're also not separate either. There is this kind of amalgamated mixing of inside and outside, self, other. It's not quite full-blown oneness. It's not also full-blown separation. It's something in between. It's something more like a mystical participation. It's more metaphorical, and it's, I think, where magic happens and where true creativity stems from. And this is part of what I want to introduce all of us to and explore with all of you in the months to come. This deeper possibility of creative participation with reality itself, which is essentially what paradigm shifting is all about. So I just wanted to let you know a little bit about what I'm thinking this week and a couple of the books I've been looking at. I hope you're having a wonderful week, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week.